Hey there, everyone. This is lesson number 9. It's our last lesson of our Frankenstein unit and our last lesson of the year. So, huge congratulations to those who've been following along, completing all the video assignments, and especially to those who've been reading the Frankenstein text and answering their master packet questions. These lessons are each worth 100 points, but then that master packet is worth 500 classwork points. So, that's your biggest chance to boost your grade. So make sure you've been completing those questions along with your reading. Okay, last class, we briefly introduced the concept of point of view. So today, our objective or goal is to first just review that concept so that you guys can explain how and why the author Shelley uses point of view in her novel Frankenstein. And you guys will be writing a short paragraph just kind of reflecting and answering questions about that point of view. Okay, so point of view. Here's just some brief review from last lesson. We talked about how the 4 main types of point of views in literature and stories is first person and then the 3 type of third persons. We don't really see second person very often, so we're not going to talk about it. We have third person objective, third person omniscient, and third person limited. Now, I didn't really explain these images in the last video, but this is just to show you the concept of point of view is the idea of who is telling the story, who is the narrator. This would be an example of third person. This is someone on the outside of the story looking in, kind of like you're watching a movie and they're telling you the story. This picture would be an example of first person. Okay, it's told from the perspective of the person who is being shot, and they have a direct experience with the person shooting right across from them. And this would give a very different type of story than this narrator would. Okay, so point of view, we're asking who is the narrator, who is the person telling the story. When we're trying to figure out what the point of view is, the first thing we look at is the pronouns. So if we see a lot of I, me, my, and mine language, then we know it has to be first person. It has to be told from the point of view of a specific character in the story, like Katniss in Hunger Games or like Star in The Hate You Give. If it's using language like he, she, him, his, her, they, them, or the characters' names, that means we're looking at third person and we're looking at an outside narrator. Now, when we are trying to figure out which kind of outside narrator, we want to think about what does that narrator know? How many characters can we see inside their head? If they can see in all of the characters, if they know every character's thoughts and feelings, then we know it's called omniscient, which means all-knowing. Sometimes the narrator might only know the perspective of one character, like Harry Potter. If they only have insight into one character's head, but it's still told from an outside perspective, we call that third person limited. And the last one is third person objective. When the narrator doesn't actually know any of the thoughts or feelings of the characters, they're just telling it kind of like a news reporter, a very kind of unbiased, just objective, here's the facts, here's the information, here's the action, no thoughts and feelings. That's third person objective point of view. We also talked about last lesson how each of the point of views has some advantages, and disadvantages. So for example, first person, we really get a deep connection with that main character like Star Katniss. With the disadvantage, we only get to see the story from their perspective. With the third persons, they're each a little bit different. Omniscient, you get to know all the characters' thoughts and feelings, but you don't get to know any one character really deeply. Third person limited is similar to first person because you get to know one character well, in this case without any bias because it's an outside narrator. But again, you don't get the perspectives from the other characters. And then third person objective, you get all the facts, all the information. It's quick paced, but you don't get to hear from any of the characters. You don't get any emotion or thoughts, which can make the story harder to connect to and harder to connect with the characters. So here's a section from Frankenstein. We're going to read it, and I want you guys to tell me which type of point of view it is. So this is the creature talking, and he says, "It was morning when I awoke, and my first care was to visit the fire. I uncovered it, and a gentle breeze quickly fanned it into a flame. I observed this also, and contrived or thought a fan of branches, which roused the embers when they were nearly extinguished. When night came, I found with pleasure that the fire gave light as well as heat, and that the discovery of this element was useful to me in my food, for I found some of the offals that the travelers had left, or some of the organs of animals, had been roasted and tasted much more savory than the berries I gathered from the trees." So if you're looking at the pronouns here, I want you to tell me which point of view you think it is. First person, third person omniscient, third person limited, or third person objective. Okay, hopefully this should have been an easy one. We have a lot of I, my, me. So this is going to be from first person. This passage is told directly from the perspective of the creature itself. So this is the advantage and disadvantage we're looking at in our story. We get deep connections with that main character, but usually the disadvantage is that you only get to see it from one perspective. However, Mary Shelley does something really unique. So when we look at what is the point of view of the whole story of Frankenstein, if you followed our narrator switches, which was in your master packet, it started out with Captain Walton, the sailor in the North Pole, telling the story. Then it transitioned to Victor, the doctor, telling the story. Then it went to the creature telling his story, back to Victor telling his own story, and then finally in the last chapter, Walton, it's back to the captain. We call this a rotating first person point of view. So instead of just one main character, we get to hear from three of the main characters from their unique perspectives. Okay, we also call this a frame story. Because if you notice, it kind of is like a mirror that we have the creature in the middle, Victor on either side, and Walton on either side of that. A frame story is a story within a story within a story. The Arabian Nights, the stories with Aladdin in them, is a famous example of that. The whole story takes place within Captain Walton's story, and in the midst of that, it's Victor's, and in the middle of that, it's the creatures. So what I want you guys to think about is, why would the author do this? Why would they create a story with a rotating first person point of view? Remember to think about the advantage and the disadvantage of first person point of view. I go back real quick, meaning that you get deep connection with my character, but usually you only see this story from one perspective. So real quick, tell me, what do you think is a reason Shelley used this point of view? Okay, hopefully you talked about how by doing this we get a deep connection and a deep insight into the creature, into Victor, into Walton's perspectives. We really get to know these characters intimately. But by doing rotating, Shelley addresses that disadvantage. We're not limited to one character like in a normal first person. We get to hear from three characters' points of views, which I think makes the story much more rich and much more complicated. So for today's lesson, we reviewed point of view, and you are actually not going to be doing a recorded discussion video. So originally, I was going to have you guys use a program called Flipgrid, and you were going to record a small video of yourself explaining how Shelley used point of view. I don't really want to introduce a new technology and a new system in our last lesson anymore. So instead, we did the Edpuzzle video. You're going to read and answer the questions for chapters 23 and 24. And I actually did record videos and posted them on YouTube of me reading both of these chapters. So if you're confused, you can listen to Miss G read both of them. And then for your focus skill, instead of doing this, you are going to just, in a paragraph, discuss how she uses point of view in her novel and why you think she chose first person over just regular first person, over the other third persons. She could have done it from an omniscient perspective. So I have some sentence stems here. You could start with, Shelley uses first person, this is supposed to say rotating first person point of view in her novel by how. I think she chose this point of view over the others because blank. I see that Shelley uses this point of view when she wrote that, and you could give some evidence. And overall, I think that Shelley's use of first person point of view has a specific effect in her story, which was blank. So really, and I'm looking for like a 5-sentence paragraph. It doesn't need to be a perfect racist paragraph, but I want you to just kind of reflect and in your own words answer why you think she chose this point of view. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Why would she choose this over other point of views? What's the effect of using this specific point of view? Maybe pull some quotes from your reading for today. And that's really your last assignment for this unit and for the year. So just as a reminder, in your Frankenstein packet, this is the Frankenstein Unit Master Packet that's in Google Classroom. You need to answer all these questions, or at least the majority of them, to get a good grade in order to get your 500-point Master Packet classwork grade. Because it's not a test grade like all of our other assignments, this will dramatically help boost your overall grade. And then your focus skill, you can literally just type it right below where it says this box here and just type your own answer. The Frankenstein text, make sure you're continuing to read Today's chapters 23 and 24. And when you go to Google Classroom, I most just recently on May 28th posted a Google Doc where I listed all the YouTube videos that I've made of me reading each of these chapters. So if you're trying to answer the guided questions in your packet and you're confused, you can go back to any of these videos, and here's the 2 ones for today, and listen to me read it, and I basically help give you the answers to those questions. So if you have any trouble or have any questions, please reach out. But otherwise, I look forward to reading your paragraphs and finishing your materials for the year.